As we discuss how to incorporate data into your proposals, we're diving into the macro and micro aspect of it, and specifically thinking about how you can capture local or unique details for specific demographics when you're writing your proposals, and also what additional data might be available that you can use to accentuate your proposals, and how do you refine that data to tell a cohesive story. Asia, I know there's so many data points that you can add into your proposals. Maybe talk through a little bit on how you were able to balance both at once
Mhm.
and use that to develop, the financial resource at a nonprofit.
Absolutely. I think one of the most key things to focus on is how you're going to communicate exactly to funders why the data is important to take into consideration for the amount of money that you're asking for. And so, with that being said, I think there's a healthy balance that does need to be had that I've seen in my experience in terms of understanding the bigger picture of exactly the needs that you are addressing through your nonprofit, while also translating that bigger picture to where it is in that particular demographic, whether that is the folks that you are servicing or the actual area in and of itself. And so for me, I think it was super important to assist nonprofits with directing them to always starting micro first before going macro, because ordinarily within our industry we do it in the reverse.
Hmm.
But I think that that creates liability, to be honest, just because it creates blinders. You may get so wrapped up in the macro data of like the big market trends where your particular area, whether that's the neighborhood all the way down to the block, may not show those findings, but it just looks differently. And so there's an opportunity there where you can actually bring in the micro data, but saying that that speaks to the larger picture of the overall issue with food insecurity or whatever your target messages or area is.
That's a great point because I think a lot of the times, the clients, the communities you're serving, they're the canary in the coal mine where maybe we see some of these issues or hardships hyper locally, but it's only a matter of time before those trends kind of spread to the larger community and even statewide. And one example I was thinking of for this discussion was the pandemic and how that affected everyone in terms of access to healthcare, access to food resources. But when you dive in a little bit more, there was an inequity in terms of
Mhm.
how communities of color had disproportionate, negative outcomes in terms of like how they can get their food. A lot of folks who didn't have the luxury of working remotely and how that affected their health outcomes and just everything else. The rapid inflation we saw, and when you're able to dive into those statistics, it was telling you a little bit more of a complete story. So understanding
Mhm.
like that macro view in terms of who you're serving is always key. But like you said, kind of drilling into the nitty gritty and like what are the specific hardships and what are the specific trends that you're seeing, and then tying that all together to think about how your program alleviates some of those challenges.
Absolutely. I mean, in response to that, even when you talk about the gaps in those findings, like there are nonprofits where you may be boots on the ground and you can see that data in real time. But to your point, it does get complicated when you're just looking at the statistics. And so I do believe that what I've seen very successfully, what I'm always encouraging nonprofits to do is to really implement the SAR model as it relates to representing your data in your proposal: situation,
Hmm.
action, and result. But what those words translate to, particularly for grant writing, is the result pieces was most important, the outcome.
Yeah.
And with that outcome, when it comes to data, you're always able to find data that fits exactly what your point is or what the need is that you're trying to address as it relates to your nonprofit's mission and the community you're serving. But the reality is bias comes up a
Yeah.
lot. And when I've worked with nonprofits in terms of translating that data, analyzing some of that data, you do have to make sure that your team is on par to be able to understand that although you found the research or the stats and the data from whatever sources that you're leveraging to support exactly what it is that you're trying to portray to your funders, but at the same time you want to be mindful of confirmation and selection bias. This is concepts that we use within stats and also professional research, where you will find data that supports your findings, but then that skews your data and it skews the message that you're putting out to funders, where you may leave something out. And funders want to see the whole picture, to your point of understanding the whole story. And so just be mindful as you are pulling data. Yes, find the sources that support exactly the need you're addressing, but also find some of the data that doesn't support it, and you can bring that up in your proposal in terms of what was successful in one area versus another. It doesn't completely skew your data, but what it does do is that you're portraying an honest, authentic message to your funder to
Yeah.
secure the funding.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I think, especially when you get tunnel vision, when you've written a lot of these applications, it's so easy, and I'm guilty of this as well, just falling back on the data points that you've used in the past that really illustrate that story. But you want to make sure you're challenging yourself so you're not cherry picking. You're looking for data that both proves and disproves your point. And I think too, it's to me, I'm thinking a lot about how do you underscore whatever data you're getting with some of the really hyper local pieces. So make client surveys, feedback, just
Hmm.
asking folks what are the challenges that they're facing, what other services might they need to access. I think those are really great ways for you to complement these data points and tell the whole story about the community you're serving and what your programming is doing. Uh,
Absolutely. And even testimonials for to again to address any of those gaps within the success that you've had. And so as you continue to evolve in your data collection process, as well as not only leveraging the data that you have, but also going after data both within your community from a micro standpoint, right, versus macro, going online and pulling that communication from larger areas that still speak to the mission and the area that you're part of. Make sure that you're really taking the time to, again, document. Engage with one another in the cohort throughout the course as it relates to whether or not you're capturing local details to complement broader demographic indicators, right? As well as any additional data that would strengthen the future application. Because although you may not win that first one or win the one that you're currently in, it's just a not yet. It doesn't mean a complete no. And then lastly, really take this time to reflect and digest some of the information throughout the module as it relates to how might you refine your data presentation so that funders can truly understand it and feel confident in being able to provide you with the funding to continue serving the communities that mean the most to you and that really deserve it. And so Anthony and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you, and we'll catch you some more throughout the rest of this module.